I am going to just get started since we are a couple of minutes late and I want to respect everyone's time. But first of all, for those who are joining us who are observing Passover, I just want to say Chag Sameach, and I hope you had a wonderful holiday. And we're kind of finishing Passover tonight, and it's a wonderful opportunity. It's always a wonderful opportunity, but in the spirit of Passover, which is, for those who don't know, the story of Jewish liberation from slavery in Egypt more than 3,000 years ago. It's a really inspiring time always for the Jewish community to look at what liberation still means, and not just for our community, but for all communities and all peoples who are experiencing oppression or persecution or are looking some sense of freedom in any sense. It could be personal freedom, emotional freedom, physical freedom. And these are the conversations that Zioness really loves to have most. And so I was just sharing with our extraordinary panelists today, and I'm going to introduce them momentarily, that when the Zioness team was thinking about having a conversation about collective liberation, thinking about the specific different kinds of oppressions and intersectional realities that so many Americans are facing today, we created a wish list of people that we would have wanted to invite into a conversation like this. And we could not be more thrilled that the people that are here because they were the dream panelists and participants in this conversation. So with that, I'm gonna do some introductions and then we'll get into it. We have a lot of ground to cover and we welcome questions in the Q&A, and just really looking forward to a very inspiring conversation with you, incredible people. So first we have Marina Shijay, my dear friend. I'm so happy to see you. Marina is founding general partner of Endemic Venture Capital. She has spent 2 decades in high-tech startups with a specialization in Web3 technologies, cybersecurity, and digital assets. Marina has held board advisory and fellowship roles with Israel Policy Forum, Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropy's reality program, the American Jewish Committee, the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture, and the Alliance of Latinos and Jews in Chicago. She holds an MBA in finance from the Wharton School and a BA and MS in anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania. Go Quakers. Ms. Shijay is also a partner at Revel Impact and CEO and board chair of Pueblo Development Commission. Additionally, she served as an appointed member of the All Pueblo Council of Governors Legislative Committee from 2019 to 2022. She is Tewa and Sephardi Jewish and married into the Pueblo of Zia. And she is a 2023 fellow at Leadership New Mexico, VC Lab in Palo Alto, and the Nahum Goldman International Fellowship. China Dickerson has spent, hi China. China has spent 2 decades of experience working in the areas of political campaigns, community development, and the federal government. She began her career as a high school student working in her congressman's district office. Upon graduating from Howard University, go Howard, Ms. Dickerson served in the U.S. Peace Corps in El Salvador, where for 2 years she facilitated the formation and improvement of programs that promoted development and capacity building in poverty-stricken municipalities. Ms. Dickerson then enrolled into Howard University School of Law and interned at the White House, Podesta Group, and managed Brianne Nadeau's winning campaign for DC City Council. Ms. Dickerson is former Deputy Director of Women Ready for Hillary and former Manager of State Engagement and Development at Emily's List. Go Emily's List. As you can tell, guys, I'm very excited about these speakers. Currently, Ms. Dickerson is the National Political Director for Forward Majority, and she also serves as ANC Commissioner for 2B04 and is an adjunct professor at American University. You guys are all really low-key. Ms. Dickerson is also proud to be the former chair of the Young Democrats of America Women's Caucus and to currently serve on the executive board of Men for Choice. Have to plug Men for Choice. Shout out to all of our friends at Men for Choice and to all men who are allies in the fight for reproductive freedom for all people who can get pregnant. And I'm already going to apologize because I've already messed up that I did not say Marina's pronouns are she, her. China's pronouns are she, her. Nate Shalev is they, them, a leading expert on inclusivity and helps to create workplace cultures where both businesses and people thrive. They were named a LinkedIn top voice and their expertise has been highlighted in the Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and more. Nate earned a BA from Barnard College of Columbia University and an MA from New York University. They're the founder of Revel Impact, a consultancy that specializes in social impact and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it is such a privilege to have you with us, Nate. And actually, I really should plug, I know I mentioned already that Nate is a LinkedIn top voice. Nate is the first LinkedIn influencer I've ever met, and their LinkedIn. They have how many? 35,000 followers on LinkedIn? You're muted.
18,000.
18,000. There's something like 35,000 that are engaging with your posts.
Yeah.
It's great.
LinkedIn is a journey.
Check out the LinkedIn influencer stuff because it's smart stuff. It's not, the vapid stuff that we see on Facebook. Okay. Nik Harris, they is a queer, gender nonconforming attorney, activist, and speaker. She obtained her undergraduate degree in political science from Florida A&M University and their law degree from Florida State University. Nik is the director of strategic outreach and engagement for the Human Rights Campaign, Go Human Rights Campaign. They have served in Florida as a senior attorney, prosecutor, and public defender. Nik was the first Black woman elected as vice chair of the HRC Board of Governors. That's totally incredible. Serves on the boards of Ruth's List, Trans Inclusive Group, the Broward County Sheriff's Social Justice Task Force, the Broward State Attorney's Advisory Council, and is in the Big Brothers Big Sisters Pride program. Nik is the recipient of countless awards, including the 2019 Ruth's List, Women Breaking the Glass Ceiling Award, and the 2020 LGBTQ Leadership Award by the Florida Diversity Council, and is a 2021 Diversity Honors Awardee. Wow. Seriously, this is the most rock star panel I think I've ever moderated, and I've had the privilege of moderating some incredible panels. So let's just dive right into it. So when we talk about liberation, I know it means different things to different people, to different communities, even to different people within those communities. There's obviously no single way to identify any community's fight for liberation, but you all represent different communities, not only different from each other, although of course there's a lot of overlap, but you all represent more than one oppressed community. So when you are thinking of collective liberation, both distinctly and together, collective liberation and the specific liberation for the communities that you are working to advance, what does that mean to all of you? And let's start with China. You can popcorn it around, China, to whoever you want to go next.
Sure. So thank you, Amanda and Netta, for this opportunity. Thank you, Zionists, for getting us all together to have this conversation. Because as you mentioned, so many similarities and intersectionalities that we all identify and possess. I think collective liberation is important just because, one, I think it is a tool of white supremacy to have us divided. I don't know if you all have ever studied the hierarchy of oppression, where it's essentially like, okay, let's get the Blacks and the Latinos to fight each other. And then that way we can go over there as white supremacists and do our thing because they're busy over there, right? Trying to sort out the differences in their communities. So I think it's important that we recognize that the enemy is white supremacy and the patriarchy, and that's it. Like that is the enemy. Wow. And so anyone who then also this is how I feel about it, even individuals who perpetuate the ideals of white supremacy. White supremacy does not just look like a white man, right? And so we have to have that conversation about why it's more important that we will not defeat white supremacy until we actually decide to band together as oppressed communities, marginalized communities.
Amen.
If anyone else wanted to jump in, I'll popcorn it. Nate.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really loved all of that, and I think it's really true about collective liberation and thinking about it. For me, liberation always feels like a really big word. It feels really big, and so for me, when I think about liberation, it's not about something extraordinary. It's about something that's really ordinary. It's about going to the doctor and getting the care I need, or going to the grocery store, or going to the park with my dog, or holding my wife's hand, or going to synagogue, or whatever it is, and not feeling like I have to be brave to do that, not feeling like this is some extraordinary act that I get to just be. And I just get to be in whatever form that is, if it's happy or sad or frivolous or angry or whatever it is, I just get to be without that fear, without having to think about it. Nik, going to you.
You popcorned it to me. It's crazy because I know this panel is on liberation, right? And I was struggling. I'll be honest, I was struggling because I'm so far from liberation, like that's a dream. And that I don't believe we will ever realize in America in my lifetime. but I also never thought we'd see a Black president. I never thought we'd see a Black vice president. The reality is it's hard for me to talk about liberation because you can't have like liberation without talking about equity and equality. And we not having any of those conversations. I don't mean we, us here, but the reality is we are so far from that promised land. And so I don't know what liberation looks for other folks. I ain't talk about Nik Harris's queer, woman of color, Black person living in the deep South, which is Florida. The reality is that is very much the deep South. And we're fighting for that every day. But just to be seen, it's like you can't have equality without talking about equity, and we can't get to liberation without addressing either of those things. And so to China's point, to Nate's point, we got to come together. Like you've got to be able to see everybody, because what liberation looks like for me may not look like the same thing for you. And so let's start at a place of even understanding that everybody on the planet is deserving of some very basic rights, right? Everybody. And so when we can just do that, then we can start to really address liberation. But that's a dream. Y'all excited me because I was like, dreaming of liberation. I don't even know what that would look like. Like I'm fighting in Florida as a gay Black woman and non-binary person even be seen, right? They are literally writing me out of the world. They're writing laws right now. My governor is up creating new ways for me not to be seen. So it's hard for me right now to imagine liberation. Just see me right now. I'm going to pass that to you, Marina.
Yeah, I wouldn't like, this is such a hard question, right? Like we're talking about survival in our communities. And for me, cultural survival is number one. So if I were to envision a liberated future, like one, it's my cultures being able to continue like uninterrupted and being able to practice them, but also, you know, like, I don't know, sometimes I think of the liberation framework just being a Western mindset, and we're still fighting for the same Western values. And to me, I don't even have Western values to start with. So that gets to be very difficult to think about, right? Because I want to live, you know, in a continuous way that, you know, I'm thinking about my future generations and, you know, continuing the legacies of my ancestors, but also that I'm living in harmony with the world around me as part of the world around me and not separate from it. And, you know, I find a lot of these conversations never get us to that point, right? And that can get to be really crushing from an Indigenous perspective. And, you know, for us, we're fighting for so many things. Like I lost 2 family members yesterday, and that's not uncommon, unfortunately. Like we've lost people that we love or care about or related to every single week, you know, for the past like 3 years since the pandemic began. And that dream of equity, like health equity, social equity, you know, all of these things, like that's a reach. So liberation is, you know, this visage of just us being as healthy as we were before other people came or were brought here. I think this is the best that we can get to from our perspective. So I'm passing it on. Or is there another question now, I guess?
Yeah.
Isn't that a, no.
Yeah, I'll go to another question, but I just want to say thank you all for being honest, because I actually should have addressed the fact that we're not trying to simplify it in this conversation. We're not trying to imply that, oh, there's an easy answer. Let's just put it out there and maybe it will be. And I actually think that your transparency and sharing the fact that the word doesn't even, we can't grasp it, right, is a really important takeaway. And I really appreciate you sharing it. And, you know, the Passover story, I think the reason why Jews talk about liberation around Passover is because even after escaping slavery in Egypt, again, 3,500 years ago, the Jewish people have experienced so much more oppression, so much more persecution. So liberation is never actually liberation. Even when you feel in a moment like you've had success or you feel free, it could be fleeting. And so, you know, I feel really emotional. I just want to say again, thank you for sharing. And also that no one here is expecting it to be easy or to be an easy conversation, but I still think it's an incredibly important conversation, because I really do feel that there are people who are social justice oriented, who care about the right things and don't have access to people like all of you and don't even know where to begin to learn. And so let's talk about all the hard things, you know, let's alert people to where they can even begin to learn and how they can start thinking differently about things they think they understand and really don't. So I guess in that vein, are there examples of progress that you feel like you can point to as an achievement, or something that gives you hope, or something that makes you feel like there can be a next step? Or does it feel like even when you take 2 steps forward, you end up taking 3 steps back? What are some things that you feel like you hold on to for hope? What inspires you that has happened before? Anyone who wants to jump in.
I'll jump in on this one. Is a reason why our first Black president, something going on with the Obamas, I'm referencing them a lot tonight, ran on a platform of hope. The reality is, if I don't have hope, I don't know why I'm doing this work. Like my hope never leaves. And do I think, we tend to overuse Dr. King's quotes, but I'm always reminded of the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But it was also Barack Obama who said it's us that bends it. And so the reality is, I don't ever lose hope. I see hope every day. I walk out my door, I see faces of folks. Like I've said a couple of times, I live in Florida. Like, we are the messiest of messy states. Like, I call our Governor Disaster. I don't know if y'all have to get rid of that. He just is a mess, right? And it seems like right now our states are in a race for the bottom to harm everybody. And I remember when it started off with like, don't say gay, and nobody cared. And I was like, that's a slippery slope, right? Because next they'll be coming for people of color. And then you can't teach African-American history, and it was stop woke and all of the other foolishness. Because once again, we thought somehow I didn't have to worry about them. We love the other people. And so the reality is, I walk outside every day and I meet people who are like, I don't like him. I don't support this foolishness, but they're quiet, right? You can tell me privately, when the reality is, I think there are more of us than there are them. As much as it's hard to believe that sometimes, they just have louder microphones, the Marjorie Taylor Greens and all that kind of foolishness, and all of these terrible folks, they have louder microphones. But the reality is, you see it every day. Like, there is a Republican governor right now speaking up about gun control. Right? It makes me sad that it took him losing somebody he cared about. It was like, we've been shooting up kids for how long? Oh, you lost your friend, and now you care about gun control. Regardless of how you got there, I still saw hope in it, right? I turned on the TV this morning. I'm not a huge fan of Senator Scott out of South Carolina, but I go, is running for president at a time when we are like, the status quo is to be like a Trump supporter, a DeSantis supporter, and folks are quietly like, making that change. But I don't think we can ever let go of hope. There is hope everywhere you look. It's when I look in Tennessee and it's kids coming out and walking out of schools in Florida and Tennessee and saying, you want to ban guns, you want to, but you don't want to, you want to ban drag, excuse me. You want to ban drag, but you don't want to ban guns. Like, the reality is, hope is all around us if we'll see it. But what we got to do collectively is put our finger on something to bend it towards the right direction. And I think we'll get there, because the only reality is for this place to go to hell. And that's not going to happen. And I keep saying, there are folks who absolutely want a civil war, and folks who I'm going, listen, your neighborhood is not going to be spared. The reality is, your neighborhood, they coming, no gate gonna keep folks out. So we all live here, and we better figure out a way to get along, or else we're all in trouble. So if you don't believe in hope, what's the alternative?
Now, see, Nik, I don't have any hope.
China, no.
China. Listen, it is hard out here for more than just pimps, and let me tell you what I do. I have faith.
Yes.
I have faith, which is, believing in the absence of evidence, because I have to believe that God will handle it. Like, I'm not evolved enough to say, oh yes, I see this bright, shiny. I'm like, okay, God, if you say so, if you say it's gonna get better, I'm a rock with you. I don't feel like it's gonna get better, but I'm a rock with, that's the faith that I have. I do think, though, like when you were mentioning, Nik, the gun violence reform, that we do have to be careful, though, about this thoughts and prayers type language, right? Like, we still, even with faith, have to have work. Like, we have to do things to farther it along. I will say, Amanda, also to answer your question about evidence of things getting better. And it's in the midst of chaos. With the pandemic, we now have folks able to work from home. We now have, for example, Orrin, who I work with with Men for Choice. He has his son Noah like sitting on his chest as he's doing Zoom. So I see all these men with their babies because the women are like, bye, you at home, so you can do this now. So the little things like that I think we don't pay attention to because it's not directly obvious that is a gender win, right? A type of the role that you play in your household, that's a win when we can work from home and be flexible. Those little things are this really quick example. Now I don't want to keep because I'll ramble. Really quick example. I just saw on Instagram, this woman quit her 6-figure job because the employer wanted her to come back to 5 days a week at work. And she said, my mental health is more important than coming back to work 5 days a week, in the office, I should say, 5 days a week. So seeing people even being able to renegotiate how they think about health and success as not being just monetarily, those are the nuggets that I carry with me to say, okay, God, you might be right. So I'll keep having the faith because I see those little nuggets. I just want to say, though, that faith and hope doesn't mean you're not still constantly tried, constantly discouraged, and you kind of have to dig yourself up out of this hole in order to do the work again the next day.
But you keep doing it.
Amen. I'm gonna let y'all go, but China,
Yes,
faith is the substance of things hoped for.
it
Hope
is.
for. I
You right.
hear you.
Jay.
I hear you though. I hear you. Because we can't
Okay.
lose you. If you not having it, I'm like, come on, it's not happening. All right, y'all.
I appreciate that. You're right. That is the definition. You're right. Let's do Marina. I love how you spell your name. That's actually the how do you say when you sound something out, the phonetic?
Phonetic. Yeah, you can
Love
tell
it.
my grandma's like not a first language English speaker.
I love it.
So those things that give us hope. I really liked your points about faith, and I had a conversation with a good friend like recently, and we were talking about like mitzvahs, like the good things that we do as Jews, like the things that we're supposed to be doing, that they're good things, and how you get this like instant just burst of like good feelings that like, okay, like our ancestors figured this out, that this is like the right path to be on, like this feels good, like we're gonna do it and we're gonna go forward and good things are gonna happen. And like just this belief that no matter where we are, like Hashem or creator, or like however you say it, like God, has got us, and like it's going to get better as long as we keep working at it and we don't give up. So I really like that. And I look at culture like I'm immersed in culture. We're here in the Pueblos in New Mexico. We had 4 days of ceremony this week. We had Besa at the same time. Like it's really beautiful to have access to so much of that. But I also know that that's not, what everyone here in the US has access to, or feels different, like might feel alienated or not accepted or not part of something. And we have the ability to reframe that like collectively now. And for me growing up, like I was an only child, and like online communities and the fact that like we can connect at a distance, right? Not just working from home, but being able to connect with each other. I think that's one of the most beautiful things that we have the ability to do right now. Like we can be, connected anywhere at any time, anywhere in the world. We can find communities of support and find each other like wherever we are. And, I think the fact that we can organize and make progress like within those communities, and not just have the social support, but actually make political progress, like that's incredible. And we live at a time right now where I have 3 Pueblo relatives in federal government. Elizabeth Reese Bowie just got appointed to be an advisor to President Biden like this week. Pauly Rivera from Pueblo Pewaukee, he's the White House tribal liaison, and Deb Mulholland runs the Department of the Interior. And this has never happened before in history. So, to say that there's not a lot of things to be hopeful for is not honest. And, you know, from a Jewish perspective, you know, I think, I mean, we have a series of endless blessings. Like, even though right now, you know, I'm seeing videos on like the Temple Mount of incited violence and that constantly escalating. You know, I'm really hopeful for, you know, a collective vision of peace and a global vision of peace that, you know, we can see and relate to each other. So, um, moving on to Nate, what are your perspectives on?
Yeah, this is such a great conversation. I'm thinking about what you mentioned about communities of support and online communities of support. The things that I talk about a lot on LinkedIn, being trans and being autistic, are both things that are you can't tell someone's trans by looking at them. You can't tell someone's autistic by looking at them. And so what gives me hope is the fact that I can talk about these things and that I'm able to actually have the conversations themselves. And so whether or not it's like a positive outcome or a negative outcome, the fact that I can actually talk about it and bring these things to light is in some form in and of itself progress to me.
Thank you all. Nate, I want to pick up on that a little because, as you know better than anyone, trans rights have really become like the culture war issue of the far right. And it's just, there's a total onslaught of anti-trans legislation, dehumanization of trans people in every aspect of society. It's something that's coming up so regularly in conversations, and there's no words to describe how horrifying. I mean, that just the language that we hear should never be spoken about any human being ever under any circumstances. Even, you know, if someone does something horrible, we shouldn't talk about people this way. And at the same time, and this is not to like justify or balance, but at the same time, I think there's more awareness of trans people, trans issues, the need to fight for trans rights than ever in my lifetime, and I'm sure ever, you know. And so I'm curious how you think about that. Where are we in kind of the timeline, especially, and obviously anyone can jump in, certainly Nik, I know you have expertise in this subject too. The timeline as we think about progress for LGBT people and queer people broadly, how much progress we've seen in the last 20 years compared to, you know, the decades before that. Do you feel like we are in, you know, a dark phase that could lead to a lighter phase, given the fact that people do care, you know, and that people are aware and there is a new consciousness on this? Or do you feel like it's hard? I know none of us feel like liberation is happening tomorrow, but, you know, is that something that you can be hopeful about? And yeah, again, where are we kind of in a timeline as far as you are concerned and how you feel?
Nik, do you want to start?
Nate, you could go ahead and take it. I'll piggyback off of that.
Okay. So I think that we are in a continuum in timeline, and I think there's a reason why trans folks now are the targets, and a lot of it is the LGB movement left a lot of trans folks behind as it was progressing. So in order for gays and lesbians to get rights, a lot of trans issues, gender identity issues, and our protections to be passed had to take out trans folks within it. Those like, we're trans folks over there, don't worry, we're like, love is love, we want exactly what you want, right? So a lot of the rhetoric had to leave trans folks behind. So I think that is part of why we're here, part of why a lot of the rhetoric that we hear is echoing a lot of the attacks that were happening on gay people in the past, that they're predators, that they shouldn't be around children. We're seeing a lot of those things being echoed now in this rhetoric, and there's a reason why it's coming back. But thinking about specifically like the laws that are being passed in Tennessee that are anti-drag laws, those are things that we've seen before. There used to be laws even in New York that you have to wear 3 articles of clothing that matched your sex, and it's wild to me, right? Because it's what does that mean for me if I'm walking down the street in Tennessee? If I was walking down the street, then I don't know what that would mean for how somebody might perceive me and my safety. So I think that we've seen this happen before. I think the way that we get out of it is folks getting rid of that us and them mentality and not thinking about it as trans issues, but as we've been talking about, thinking about it as collective liberation issues. Because when we're restricting things on gender, that affects us all. It affects women wearing pants, it affects men who wear suits, it affects all of us when we're thinking about these issues of gender identity. And so I think in order for us to really take that next step, that's the mindset that we need to get into. And once we can do that, that folks see it not just as a trans issue, but as like an all of us issue, because it's going to affect all of us at some point, then I think we can actually get there. So I don't see it yet, but I feel hopeful that that can be a path forward.
Great answer, Nate. I was gonna say this. I'm gonna sort of incorporate the last question in this. As we were talking about hope and what are some signs of that, Dr. Rachel Levine, right? 4-star officer and across armed services. That's unheard of, right? But when we look at this administration, that's happening. The reality is, are we in a dark time? Absolutely. I don't know how you witnessed January 6th and one like, what has happened here? Like we are literally, we had white people tearing the Capitol down. And it was like, I just knew that I was like, what has happened to America, right? The reality is we are in a very dark time. And it's like, you know, before I will say this before we jumped on, I'm in Broward County and like people are swimming down the roads. You know, to me, it feels like the same issues we're facing with climate change, we're facing as a country and a world where we're approaching that sort of brink where I keep going back to at what point are we beyond like no return, right? And it feels like sometimes we're getting there and we'll need a full reset. I mean, we are definitely in a dark time, but what I can say proudly is that the new movement where we are now is we aren't leaving no folks behind, right? We're not leaving our trans siblings anywhere. So the reality is this is the path forward. And I mean this literally, and you just heard this out of our representatives Jones and Forth in Tennessee, no justice, no peace. And so the reality is we will not make any compromises to leave people behind. And if folks think that's where we're going, they're confused. And so you can have this country the right way, or we can tear this thing down and start over again. And that's going to be people's choice. And I don't say that to incite violence, but that's where we're really headed. That's where we've been headed for a long time. And folks need to wake up. And I keep saying you won't be protected. Gates won't protect you. And so we have to all care. And so when you see, you know, schools with white children being shot up and we keep going and they trying to make issues about trans people not doing anything to you, right? They want to live their lives like everybody else. And that's foolishness. And they want you to keep your eyes off of the real ball. But the reality is we're not going to turn back. We're not going to leave people behind. That playbook is over. That's dead and gone.
I also think, though, it's important to understand, and I'm glad, Amanda, you referenced like a historical context. I think oftentimes we forget that this game has been played, right? Like if you know a little bit about Marsha P. Johnson, one of the things that she talked about, and her friend who I always, God, forget her
Sylvia
name.
Rivera?
Yes, Miss Sylvia, yes. That during one of her speeches, she said that she had always fought on the gay right, because a lot of folks are like, oh, she's a trans activist. Well, because she's trans, but her activism was not for trans rights. And during one of her speeches, she said, you know, I was helping out the gay white men. I was like, okay, well, if the gays get the rights, then we certainly will get the rights because we are siblings. And so then they will help us. And she recognized in her fight that the white gay men were not interested in trans folks or even necessarily interested in lesbianism, which is why I said white supremacy and patriarchy doesn't just look like, right, that thing. Gay folks can be white supremacists or perpetuate white supremacy. So I think it's important to understand like this intersectionality piece, how this works, and why that collective liberation, how we strategize, making sure to bring everyone along is really important. MLK had a similar issue. He was fighting for everyone, but then in his letter to Birmingham jail, he talks to the clergy and essentially says, you all are garbage. I thought we were on the same side and you're not fighting and doing the Lord's work like you said you wanted me to do and that I thought all of us did. And I think oftentimes we forget about what Marsha P. Johnson said and what MLK said because we only want to talk about the happy stuff. We don't want to talk about how they were aggressive against white supremacy, even amongst their friends or who they thought were their friends. So I'm always encouraged when I hear people talk about what did it look like then and what does it look like now? Because I think in a way, like Nik mentioned with the Capitol, it just evolves, oppression evolves. And that is very unfortunate.
Yep. No question.
Amanda, can I say this too? I like, it makes me sad, Roe v. Wade, but in some ways I was like excited. I was like, oh, will y'all wake up now?
Yeah.
You know, right? Like, they're doing so much. They're creating our coalition, right? Because I'm like, damn, y'all just don't care, right? Y'all coming for women, y'all coming for LGBTQ people, you've been coming for Black and brown folks. Like, you coming at every angle. And so we're starting to realize, like, oh, we got to be together, right? We got so like, the coalition is happening because we now understand, no, there's no safety because you thought you were going to be okay. Oh, you have no right over your body, no control over your body, and so many things. So that's a hope. I'm hopeful we're building that coalition, but also concerned.
Yeah, I mean, yes to everything that all of you said. And I'm curious if you can reflect a little bit on how you think about coalition building. And I know you're all in a lot of different coalitions doing a lot of incredible justice work. And, you know, I will say, as a Jewish activist, and I know, you know, that Nate and Marina can also share their experiences with this, the anti-Semitism that we experience in a lot of coalition work is so frustrating, both, of course, because it's harmful to us as Jews, and also because it is extraordinarily harmful for the integrity of the movements. And it's everything you just said about, you know, the way that everyone is attacked, and that white supremacist China has been emphasizing this from the beginning, that white supremacists love for us to fight each other. It's much better for progressives to fight each other than to fight white supremacy. So whether you respond by speaking specifically about anti-Semitism, how do you think about building cohesive, sustainable coalitions where there aren't litmus tests and purity tests, and where we can all agree that we need bodily integrity for all human beings, and we need people to be able to marry who they love, and we need people to be able to make choices about the lives that they live, and we need to just respect how people identify and want to be identified, like the kind of broad concepts. And that's not to say that we should forget the details or that the details don't matter, but, you know, at some point we have to focus on the big picture. And everyone, in my opinion, the strongest possible coalitions we can build are ones where every single person who cares is welcome and feels part of it, and is not ostracized or, you know, or told that they're part of the problem for existing in a way that, you know, other people maybe don't understand. So how do you think about that, and how do you address it? I know you're all, you know, working in these spaces, and I'm sure are experiencing these challenges. How do you think about it and address it in your work? Marina, I know you're dealing with this all the time.
Another big question. So I really,
tonight.
huh?
That's
Well,
not-
I think one of the benefits of being an intersectional person myself is that I can disrupt a lot of bias, and I can ask a lot of like really critical questions when I do encounter it, that, you know, like, 'cause I always am watching to see, where does this bias come from? Is this coming from a place of like vitriol and actual hatred, or is this coming from a place of like misinformation and limited experience, right? And if it's the latter, like the first former, I won't engage with at all. Like, it's just not worth my time. I don't want that around me. But if it's the latter, you know, I can ask really targeted questions and like make, you know, consistent points that like, look, you know, like I'm a person like standing across from you, and we have completely shared values in every other way except this one way, and you're biased in this, you know, assumption that somehow I don't, because I'm a Jew, and I'm a Jew who loves Israel, and I'm a Jew who loves my people. And like, you know, I also, you know, want everybody to be prosperous and stable and safe, and have, you know, opportunities for their families and their children, or, you know, whatever that family looks like. I also wanted to make one quick point about, you know, the trans battles in the US. Like that entire gender binary perspective is a complete colonial fabrication, and like no one in history before the last like few hundred years, like, you know, collectively had the same definitions of what you know, either side of this was. And to say that the clothing items is bizarre, but you know, I think when we talk about that intersectionality, and I just brought that into an intersectional space for myself, intentionally, to, you know, to demonstrate that we can make those connections with each other in so many simple ways. And it's trying to seek that connection in a conversation, as opposed to seeing the person across the table from you as an enemy, whether, they're right wing, whether they're, whoever they are, like they're human. And like, if we start from a place of shared values, whether they're trying to consolidate power, that's another thing. But like, if we can start from a place of just like human values, I think, it really drives the conversation further than it could be otherwise.
This reminds me, Marina, that I've been hearing a lot about, and admittedly need to do a deeper dive, but I've been hearing a lot about how the Bible, of course, the, preeminent religious text, treats gender. And so I just Googled, just because I couldn't remember exactly the number of genders that the Bible talks about. And what came up is a Human Rights Campaign document that I'm like trying to scan over on this screen. And I don't know, Nick, if you're familiar with this document, but I mean, given that a lot of the conversations, center on religion and the fact that, God says a marriage is between a man and a woman and, all of this stuff. Well, actually, the Bible really is not so straightforward at all. And I think the number is like more than a dozen different genders. If I don't remember, I don't know. Nick, are you smiling because you know this, or?
No, you're good. Keep going. No, you're fine, Amanda. You're doing great.
I know that there are many more than 2 genders that are referenced in the Bible. I just don't know exactly the number.
In the Talmud, I think it's something like 7 or 8. It's something like
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Maybe it's 7 and not 17, but either way, it is absolutely not 2. Absolutely not 2. And so, we are all people of faith, I think. And we can acknowledge that there is also a problem in some faith communities where there is a kind of stringent view of what religion is supposed to mean. And, if we all did think the way that China was talking about and kind of put our faith in the fact that hopefully good things will happen, we should also put our faith in the fact that whatever God we believe in would want us to treat each other with humanity and would want us to have equity and would want us to be liberated and to see steps, of progress in that direction. And anyway, so thank you guys for sharing these reflections.
It's just, I also wanted to say, Amanda, well, 2 things. One, to the point you just made. I always, even though I grew up very religious and I am a very faithful person to God, Jesus, like I'm a Christian, I wholeheartedly believe that, and we were taught that you need to have a personal relationship with God. I wholeheartedly believe that the God that I serve would not say to me, even though I am cis heterosexual, would not say to me, oh, you can't come to heaven because you had sex with a woman. What type of garbage God is that? Like, there is no way my God would say, oh, because you decided to wear a suit or because you're a man and you decided to wear a dress, you can't get into heaven. Like, that's not, or that you don't want to be identified as a man, you want to be identified as a woman. Like, what does any of that have to do with God's love for us? For me, as long as you treat people with human rights, that does not mean you need to love them, but you need to respect them. For me, that is what the entire Bible says from front to end, right? To be respectful of other people's choices and decisions and to make good choices and decisions for yourself. I will tell you though, and I'm not going to go on my rant about progressives and Democrats.
Want to hear the rant. We want to hear the rant.
It boils me that I feel like to be a lot of in these progressive spaces, you have to know all of the things. And if you don't know all of the things, if you're not woke, if you're not evolved in a certain way, then you're canceled. I do not like cancel culture. Quick story. I'm originally from Charleston, South Carolina. I did not know the Confederate flag was such a divisive issue until I moved up here. We actually had there was a huge back and forth a couple of months ago on Twitter about this. Southerners have a different understanding of racism and what it looks like and how it's perpetuated and effectuated than Northerners. So when I was young, I rode in pickup trucks that had Confederate flag. Like my friends had, I would eat in their parents' house at the same dinner table, and there's a Confederate flag on the mantle, and their mom telling me to remind my mom that they're supposed to meet to go shopping this weekend. You know what I mean? And so it just, even though we understand the history of the Confederate flag, what racism looks like in the South, we are so not concerned with a flag and more concerned with I don't know, getting shot by the police, or not too long ago having a noose tied around our neck. You know what I mean? It's just different levels to it. And so I say that to say, I really wish even the progressive community, I think sometimes the pendulum has swung too far, where if you're not woke, you don't know the terms, you don't know all of the things, you don't know what just happened in the news, then you are somehow not with the program. And so I will say, even though I appreciate the pronoun, I don't like that every call I get on, they say, introduce yourself, give your name, your organization, and your pronouns. What if I don't want to call me China? And so sometimes I think we swing the pendulum. I think it's good to talk about the pronouns because it normalizes that people aren't necessarily what you think you see of them, which is important. But I also think this mandatory, say what gender you are, say how you identify, to me defeats the purpose of the entire movement, right? Because I shouldn't be forced to identify as anything. That's exactly what non-binary, I shouldn't be forced to identify as anything. And if I choose to identify as something, then I should be allowed to tell you, and you should respect that, right? So I just think all of the problems can be solved if we recognize the humanity in each other, which also means we have fallacies and that we're all learning every day. And so we need to give grace. And I think oftentimes coalitions get so high and mighty that they don't recognize that some of the people that they need to bring with them are not there yet. So they need to figure out a way to meet them where they are.
Oh,
I was actually gonna say, echo a lot of what Marina just said, and China. The reality is, your question was about coalition building. I tell people I'm on the ground all the time. I meet people right where they are. If I'm talking to people who think the same stuff I do, what are we doing? We got to get out of echo chambers. So, like, number one, you can't grow up in the deep South and not know what that flag is for us. But the same point is, those are kids I went to school with too. And I don't cancel folks. I talk to them, and I'm like, a lot of this stuff is misinformation, ignorance. To Marina's point, where did you start off? Here's the thing. I live by a Yama who says, when you see crazy, it's okay to cross the street. Some folks I'm just not gonna argue with. If you don't have a baseline understanding of, like, a certain level of, I don't tolerate, anybody that knows me will tell you, don't come at me. You can't make a joke. I don't anti-Semitic comments, statements. You will be canceled. Me. Like, I'm going to call you out. I'm going to address it. And then I'll let you know, oh, it's not funny. It's not cool with me. This is not how I operate my life. But the reality is, most times I find is misinformation. I don't think people just out to hate folks. You have some who are. Those are the folks we'll need to deal with. They're at the fringes. But there are a whole lot of people that we can build coalitions with. But that's one-to-one. We say in the Human Rights Campaign, we're in the business of changing hearts and minds. The Human Rights Campaign is only as great as the humans in it. Any coalition is only as great as the people in it. So I meet you right where you are, because I went to folks who I love when they would secretly tell me, like, Nik, I'm sort of embarrassed I voted for Trump. And they would, like, tell me like it was a real unburdening. And I was like, cool. So let's talk about that. Would you do it again? What, how did that feel? You got a whole wife and a daughter. You see what's happening in the court. Like, but people feel comfortable to say this stuff to me, and I'm glad they do, because I'm like, who else are they going to talk to? If you shutting everybody down, to China's point, how are we changing hearts and minds? The civil rights movement, we weren't successful because the 12% of the population believed anything. You got to bring more people with you. You've got to broadly build a coalition. I'll just end by saying this. My parents were homophobic as hell. And now my mom is running a jazzercise class. Called me the other day talking about, baby, what's my pronouns? I said, wow. She talking about, because I want to tell the ladies in the jazz class, we need to start using pronouns. Y'all, I cried like a little baby. My parents were homophobic until their child came out, and now they're allies. You've got to lean in with folks, and this stuff on how, you can't make mistakes. That's crazy. We're not going to get to whatever this promised land liberation looks like unless we do it together. My humanity is attached to yours. So I care about anti-Semitism. I care about racism. I care about homophobia and transphobia. I care about all of it. We have to.
I just have to give one more story because Nik is pumping me up with this coalition.
Come on, John.
I work in politics, of course. There is the use of this term Latinx. I'm not Latino, so I want to call the Latino people what they want to be called. So if they say they want to be called Latinx, we need to call them Latinx. But guess what? They don't say they want to be called Latinx.
Depends.
So why does the coalition and the movement continue to use this term? And all of the folks I know who do polling and research, they say China, the Hispanics in Florida, the Hispanics in California, the Hispanics in New York, those in Washington State, overwhelmingly appreciate Hispanic or Latino, right? Now, is there a conversation about how languages across the globe are gendered? Sure. But to what Nik is saying, and Maria, like, you have to meet people where they are. And if I, as a Black woman, go into a Hispanic Latino community saying Latinx, I'm not attempting to even understand their culture. I'm telling them what their culture should be saying. And that is not the way it should be. And so I think we have to be careful again in not meeting people where they are and not asking them the questions of what they need, instead of using our JDs and our PhDs and our MBAs, our education to tell them, because of all these theories we've learned in school, what their culture should be like. Yeah, the Latinx thing really grinds my gears. There's good intention in it, but it also proves that you lack cultural competency when you use language like that, which is fine, but it should be acknowledged.
I think it's a good example of where the purity tests go too far. That if you say Hispanic, you're not seen as worthy of being part of the movement, when actually there's nothing wrong with Hispanic. Actually, Hispanic is gender neutral, just for the record, and I think about this a lot. But I totally take your point, and I think it's reflective of a lot of the other challenges in coalition building and organizing spaces, because ideally, everyone who genuinely cares, regardless of their comfort level with the language, should be part of the spaces. That's how the spaces can move forward. Nate, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to reflect. I know there's a lot you might have wanted to jump in on. No? Okay.
No, I'm in for all of it. I think that's right. I think it's about meeting people where they are. I also agree. I don't think cancel culture is helpful in any way, shape, or form, and listening to folks, listening to communities and how we're describing ourselves and why it's important and all of that, and then making decisions based on that. Language will always be imperfect, and so understanding that and understanding that there's different ways that we're trying to describe intangible things.
Yeah, amen. I have 1,000 more questions for all of you. And I know we're running out of time. I just want to make sure does everyone have like another 10 minutes or so? Is that okay, Marina?
Yeah, cool.
Just because I know we were never going to get to all the questions, but I just want to make sure we reflect on, at least some of the work that all of you are doing. So, China, I would love to hear from you about liberation from the perspective of reproductive freedom, specifically as it relates to now a potential national ban on mifepristone, on Black maternal mortality rates, and the way that women of color, and in particular Black women, have disparate health outcomes with pregnancy and birth. I know you work on a lot of different issues, but I feel that you are the repro expert on the panel, and these are such serious issues from any liberation conversation, no matter how far we are from actual liberation. Just would love your reflection on that.
Yes, so quickly, I have a reproductive justice perspective, which is reproductive freedom is not just being able to have an abortion. Reproductive freedom is about healthcare, which actually then extends to more than just people who could get pregnant. It's also those individuals who contribute to getting the person who could get pregnant. And so I think it's important, going back to the coalition stuff, for us to broaden, right, this definition of reproductive freedom and call it what it truly is, which is an attack. It's gender discrimination is what it is. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she actually said before she passed away that making Roe v. Wade about privacy rights and not about gender discrimination is something that she wished she would have been able to go back and change. I will say and I think Nik made this point earlier, we were able to win a lot of elections last cycle because white women got scared when they saw Roe being overturned, because then they were intimately impacted, right? So again, it's not until you or someone close to you is impacted that you decide to jump on the train, right? And so it is discouraging, and Nik made this point, it is discouraging to see the rollback, but it's also encouraging to see now people actually listening and paying attention and not taking their rights for granted, and realizing how even within their privilege, there can be oppression and disadvantages. So I do actually think we're going to figure out this fight for reproductive freedom on the state level. I'm not trusting that the federal government will handle it. I think we'll figure it out on the state level. But I really wish the movement would start talking about reproductive freedom as a healthcare issue and not just about abortion. I'm currently going through IVF. The inability for a lot of people to afford that is a healthcare issue, and it's a reproductive freedom issue. Women who are going through menopause, right, who are afraid to talk about it or go to the doctors to get what they need because they are embarrassed, and there's all this stigma. That is a reproductive freedom issue. So there are many issues, I think, that fall within reproductive freedom that we need to address, and ultimately the word is healthcare. We all need healthcare access, quality and accessible healthcare.
Yes, I just need to say really quickly, I should have said at the beginning of the conversation that Zioness is a 501c3, so we don't endorse or oppose candidates for public office. But obviously we care very deeply about access to abortion, healthcare, quality, accessible healthcare. And, I think we can say for certain, because it's not about any individual candidate or party, we can say for certain that when abortion is on the ballot, it wins every time. So, Americans want abortion access and Americans want healthcare. And this is a thing that, for sure, I totally agree with you, the language. I am constantly so frustrated that we call ourselves pro-choice and other people call themselves pro-life. Those are just such ridiculous binaries, and neither of the labels relate in any way to, the actual positions that underlie them. So anyway, thank you for that.
They're not pro-life.
And
They're not pro-life.
Anyone who opposes a pregnant person's ability to make choices about their own health, their own bodies, and really just anything relating to their pregnancy does not care about the life of the pregnant person. So just not, yeah. I know we all agree on this, but it's just.
Right. We care about babies till they get here.
Right.
Then what? We care about children till they get here. And then look at our school system and look at like it's crazy.
Do we even, because if pregnant people can't have health care, then the fetus is not going to be safe. And when it becomes a baby, it's also not going to be safe, and it's not going to have a good delivery. And the mother, a Black woman who's having a child is, at extremely high risk of adverse health consequences and would not be able to nurse the new baby. There's just so many compounding effects of not having healthcare, to China's point. So you can't even say.
And on the other side, Amanda, the choice, that word implies privilege. I had an abortion twice. I didn't think there was another option. Oh, I have a choice. Immediately when I found out I was pregnant, I was calling okay, what clinic am I going to? There was not this, oh, well, I could do this and I could do that, or maybe I could. There was none of that consideration. It was, we are going to go get an abortion. So even the term on our side, choice, implies a certain level of privilege that a lot of us don't have.
A really important perspective. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda and China, for that.
Thank you all. Nate, I really wanted to ask you, as you know, about disability and language. And because you speak so publicly about being autistic and what that means for you and how you engage and how, as you already said, you feel a certain level of privilege, even being able to talk about this and to bring awareness to these issues. I wanted to share for, anyone who's interested in the Zoom, that we at Zioness posted something recently. It's Autism Awareness Month. We posted something that we thought was thoughtful and meaningful, highlighting Autism Awareness Month, and we got a lot of criticism on the post. And of course, we felt terrible because we would never want to offend or to do it wrong. And we had done research, and it turns out perhaps the research either wasn't right or the people who were commenting on it didn't like it. And so, I actually wanted to reflect from all of you, and specifically China and Nik, talking about meeting people where they are. I believe so deeply in that we can't automatically judge people and shut down to conversation, because you will never move someone. You will never show them your humanity or your needs or how they can be an ally to you if you can't engage, with what they think they see and try to show them why you're not what they think they see. And, Nate, you're always there when I need to have a conversation or to learn. And you always, treat me with such grace and teach me. And I learn so much from you. And on this, the question of, do we say it's a person with autism or an autistic person? How do we, address, and how do we be allies? What is the language? How has it maybe evolved over time? And when you talk about these issues, how do you choose the language that you use or that you want your audience to hear?
Yeah, so I think language shapes how we perceive the world. So when we're being intentional about language, that's part of it. It shapes our understanding of it. And so when we're thinking about disability and autism, neither of those are dirty words. They're not bad words. And so when we use euphemisms, when we're saying people with special needs or differently abled, we're already framing the conversation as if it's something that we shouldn't be talking about. So autistic, disabled, they're just descriptors. I am autistic. It just means that my brain functions differently than a majority of other people's brains, and it functions very similarly to other neurodivergent brains. So it's really, that's what we're talking about here. And so when we're thinking about identity first or people first language, most autistic people and most disabled people prefer identity first language because it feels like it's part of who I am. It's part of our identities. It's part of how I'm interacting with the world. And so that's what we want reflected in the language. And so when we're thinking about, if I'm thinking about saying I'm a person with autism, it sounds like I've got something. It sounds like it's something that needs to be cured, needs to be fixed, needs to be addressed, and that's not it. I'm very proud of who I am in my autistic brain, and that's okay. But when I'm encountering an environment that isn't set up for me, whether it's sensory or social norms are super unclear, I'm not going to be able to function very well. But that's not because I'm autistic, it's because of my environment. And so I want to have that always be reflected in the language that I'm using. And I think most other autistic people do as well. And that's why it's primarily identity first, because that's how we're thinking about it, that it's okay that it's an integral part of me. That's not the issue. The issue is the stigma, the issue is the bias, and the issue is how things are set up.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So, okay, last two questions are for Marina. I'm going to try to combine one of my questions with one of the Q&A questions, and then we'll wrap up with a kind of positive, hopefully uplifting question for all of you. Same as I said for Nate, that Nate makes himself available for me in ways that I really appreciate when I have hard questions and, want to be able to ask them without judgment. And I want to thank you so much for that. And Marina also, we have these really deep conversations about things that I know I don't understand, and that you have so much patience with me, Marina, when I want to learn about Indigenous issues. And we've talked so much about, Jews as an Indigenous people also, and where there's overlap and where there isn't, and where there's co-option and where there's performative stuff going on. And, so, I also really wanted to reflect, and I thought you might do this with the first question about liberation. I thought you might talk a little bit about the fact that you've told me that you actually don't like the word liberation when it comes to Native people and Indigenous rights and activism. And I just would love a little bit of a reflection on that. What is the right terminology for people who care about Indigenous rights and sovereignty? And then the kind of connected question from the Q&A is that as we get closer to a point of no return for our planet in the fight for climate and environmental justice, is it acknowledged in your movements and corporations that Indigenous peoples have been on the front lines of the climate catastrophe, and that there cannot be collective liberation for all of us without protecting Indigenous land rights and sovereignty? I know Marina has thoughts about
So I'll answer the first part quickly. So we don't talk about liberation in an Indigenous sense, like rarely, and sometimes in intersectional spaces it'll come up, or people who are like very much in outside organizing spaces, but internally, like this is never a word that we use. We always talk about strengthening our sovereignty because we are in the US. Like this is not a country of 50 states. Like that is the first myth that you learn in like 5 years old in elementary school. Like this is a country of 50 states, 574 independent sovereign nations under international law. These are separate sovereign nations that like are not part of the United States, and tribal citizens are dual citizens of the US and tribal nations. So when we talk about our sovereignty, that has to do with, returning to our culture, practicing our culture, and just not even being defined under Western terms. So decolonization, or better termed indigenization, is like where we are looking at those things. And, that includes like relationships with, everyone around us. So when we talk about the fact that there's no liberation for anyone without, indigenous peoples, like there's a statistic that the UN likes to throw around, and I'm in these UN spaces pretty consistently, and they tend to be siloed, and we have these statistics and they don't go anywhere, right? So the statistic is that 80% of the world's biodiversity and wildlands are stewarded by indigenous peoples. And indigenous peoples make up 5% of the global population, 350 million people worldwide. There are indigenous peoples in every type of country, every continent, every phenotypic presentation. And that 5%, the way that I like to think about it, and it's a more empowering statistic, is that 5% is 400% more successful than the 95% of the remaining population at environmental stewardship. And when we look at it like this, if we're not terracidal, like, it's not even like a right-wing political, left-wing political, like collective liberation. Like we need collective survival as a species. And if we are going to survive as a species, like we have to have indigenous peoples leading the way, because we have that uninterrupted ancestral knowledge that is tens of thousands of years old, right? Like, and I didn't grow up in my tribal community. I didn't have that privilege. I grew up away, and now I'm home, and my husband's a tribal leader, and I have traditional responsibilities, and it's like having a full-time job in addition to all other full-time jobs. So it's really difficult, but the hardest part is the invisibility and the fact that we are consistently excluded, or we're perceived in outside ways that like we're not given the authority in our own experiences, and that's consistent, and that's inconsistent organizing spaces and political spaces. And tribal nations have relationships with the US that are mandated under law that like no one pays attention to. So if we're having these liberation conversations, no one's actually talking about, like, when we talk about health, like IHS is like the most underfunded department of the US government. Like we get like 1/3 of the health spend as a standard US person on like Medicaid, and that's already lower than somebody else with private health insurance. So when we're looking at the outcomes and like the fact that we live, in our 60s on average as Native people, it's very different. And so I fully agree with this question, and I appreciate that this audience member asked it. So thank you all for the time.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's personal. So just to wrap up on something a little more positive, what do you all do for self-care? How do you keep, I know China has no hope, no happiness, no joy. But she's still laughing and she's still doing the work every single day. So what keeps you going?
I mean, honestly, it's conversations like these, because we're so inundated with social media, right? Especially during the pandemic. So if you don't get outside and actually talk to regular people or engage in conversations like these, you would think that you're insane, right? And so I get joy out of just shooting the breeze with like regular people outside of politics, and we might have totally opposite views on politics, right? Big P politics. But when it comes down to everyday dating, having a family, being a mom, being a dad, being a student, having to go to school that might be potentially dangerous, all of these, we have not being able to afford eggs. The eggs are like $10 in my refrigerator. These are all things we have in common, and having those types of conversations is what keeps me grounded. And I'll go ahead and say it, what keeps me hopeful. Are you all happy now?
Made her say it. Who's up next? Who are you popcorning to?
I will go to Marina. And Marina, I actually want to have a conversation with you because I think the Indigenous people question is important, because I've always heard that one of the reasons we don't consider Indigenous people in politics is because of what you mentioned, these sort of individual, how do I say, political systems that you all have within. And the way our country works, unfortunately, is if you don't contribute to the two-party system, right, then they sort of like write you off. And so I just think what you said about this sovereignty and all, I just want to follow up conversation with you about the political process.
It's partially that, but it's also like partially because our political status invalidates the United States, especially since the Pope repealed repealed the doctrine of discovery, which is the basis of US land law. And so like what happens now? Like we don't know like what's going to happen. And so, you know, even like we see these DEI battles and it's like it's still on stolen land and we still don't have reality of religious freedom and all of these and like, you know, honored treaties at all or any of these things. So we can talk about this some other time.
Okay.
But what keeps me hopeful is just love for, you know, people in my life that, you know, are doing amazing things or just even here with me in this experience. Like my family and my community and people doing good work out there. You know, I think I am constantly inspired by, you know, the hard work and like the battles that I see other people having. And, you know, every time, like one of the things that we say in our tribal communities is that like, when we think about like our grandparents, like we carry their legacies, but not their burdens, right? And like every generation has their own fights. But one of the things that I always am like in very much admiration of, like each one of you all in this conversation has like very different challenges than me, right? And like mine feel insurmountable most of the time, and it's just really heavy. But then it's like, okay, everybody's struggling under that same weight. And honestly, it's that colonial thinking, and we got to get rid of that. Like y'all just come like band together with the natives and like we'll shift it all and make it better.
Thank you for sharing that. Oh, emotional. Nick, do you want to go?
Y'all, I look down because I'm writing down Marina's nuggets. Marina, I got about 5-6 nuggets you said that I've been just like writing on my phone. So I thank you so much. I thank all of y'all. What do I do? So I had to learn, number one, rest is not the absence of work, because I used to swear I was off my job and then it was okay and come back and be as tired as I was when I left. So for me, I do a gratitude list and I get quiet. I'm gonna quote Beyonce, I'm still looking for tickets. If anybody listening out there has some tickets, please call me. But I think about Break My Soul, right? And Beyonce says, if you don't seek it, you won't see it. If you don't think it, you won't be it. That we all know. And so for me, I'm always thinking about the fact that, you know, with all the negativity, I don't watch the news. I make sure I try and get rest. I surround myself with folks who love me. The haters, I let them stay outside and I cross the street, like I said, when I see crazy. But I do a gratitude list every morning when I wake up, and it just reminds me to stay hopeful and stay grounded. And so y'all will definitely be on my gratitude list tomorrow, because I really appreciate when I can come in a space and just feel fed. And it just motivates me to keep doing this work, because I'm like, I know there's more to do, and we just built a little mini coalition right here. So I expect to hear from all of y'all.
This is a group chat. Seriously, this has got to be a group chat.
Nate, popcorn. Wait, is Nate frozen?
Oh
Nate out there
no.
frozen.
Nate, come back.
Oh.
Nick.
Nate, that's a great frozen pose, though.
It
Mine
is.
always terrible.
Yeah, because
Kinda
you
like
like
this.
get caught looking crazy. Yeah.
Right, I'm always crazy.
But
There you
very,
go,
very
Nate. You're
good.
Okay,
back.
I'm back.
You're
Yes.
back.
I was like, I'm just
There
gonna
you
keep
go.
moving until you tell me I'm back. I did get the
Yeah,
note that
you're
my
back.
internet is unstable. Self-care and what keeps me going. I think it's just knowing and being okay that my needs are different than other people's needs and having that be okay. And so that means like if I'm in a crowded space, it's okay that I'm gonna wear earplugs. I've had like a stim toy this whole time. It's like okay that it's okay that my needs are different than others, and it's okay that I can pursue what I need in any given situation. And so that is what I think about as self-care and what I think about when I'm thinking about how I can continue to do this work. It's knowing what I need and being okay with getting it.
Netta and Amanda, I just wanted to quickly say to you all, and actually Nate, they also say like Play-Doh works well. And I need to get me some more of that to like be able to play within your hand during these crazy meetings that people somehow have. I wanted to say in total transparency, when I got the invitation from you, Netta, and I'm saying this as a Black person, when I got the invitation from you, I said, oh, no. We're not doing this Zionist thing with the Black people that y'all are not going to get me in trouble and canceled. So no. And then I said, let me call Oren. Because when you type in Zion on Google, it's a whole bunch of not nice things. So I called Oren and I said, Oren, friend, one of the loves of my life, I got to have a frank conversation with you about this. And he's like, you're my friend, so I'm going to break it down and educate you on this. This all goes back though to what Nik and Marina and Nate, what we're all talking about is being willing to be this sort of, I don't give people grace. China doesn't understand the Zionist and Zionism is because it's not part of her world. And so she went on Google, got confused. And who am I, since I'm a Zionist, Oren, to say, go figure it out? That's not helpful. And so I think, first of all, I appreciate you all allowing us this opportunity, but I also just wanted to share that I originally was like, oh no, Black Twitter ain't gonna get me for talking with these people. And then I understand that you all just want self-determination, like Black folks, like Indigenous folks, like everybody under the umbrella who's been historically oppressed in this world. So I am with you all because we all want sovereignty, self-determination, the freedom to be human beings.
I am legit about to start crying because I was so excited for this conversation. Oh my God. I could not have imagined how meaningful this would be, how much I would learn from all of you, how connected you would all feel to each other. And I mean, if only this could, whoever just joked that this is a coalition, but if this is what it could look like to be in coalition, we could all have liberation tomorrow. So I'm sorry, but wow, I can't thank you all enough for this. And for China, thank you for saying yes. And I'm really glad that you're glad that you said yes. And let's just keep these conversations going. I mean, this is what gives me hope. 1,000%. This is what gives me hope. I do not have this a lot, but being in community with people who have different challenges, but care about people, want there to be love and light and respect and humanity for people. You're all out there. There's more of us. We have to go find them. We have to bring them in. But what a reminder. This conversation has been such an incredible reminder that the work that we're doing, there is progress to be made. We will make it. We'll just expand this circle. We all have more circles. We have more people to bring in. So next Passover, we're going to have hundreds of people on the Zoom. We're going to feel closer to liberation, all of our issues, all of our communities, and really maybe like we can get there. That's my hope. That's my feeling from this.
We should do like a film, like a recorded, like a videographer should come in and film like an actual Seder with us talking about these things, like
Wait.
in person.
We're absolutely doing that. So now China has to come in person and with a bunch of
I'll
Zionists.
do it. I'm down.
We'll make Oren come too, so you'll have your brother there. I was texting Oren throughout this saying, China is the coolest person ever. How do I be her best friend? And I said, she's ranting about Latinx. And he said, yeah, that sounds like China. So, and he said, you're like his sister, which it sounds like it's a very shared. Again, China, I've been hearing about you for probably 5 years. So it's just such a privilege to meet you. And thank you again. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you all for saying yes. I know it was hard to plan and nail down in time, and that you're all extraordinarily busy people that are changing the world for the better, but wow. Thank you again. And that's it, everyone. Okay. Bye.
Good meeting you all.